Welcome back for episode 27 of the Astronomical Apocrypha, the Seleukid Empire narrative let's play for Rome 2 with Divide et Impera. Last time, Euclid and Antilochus laid siege to Cath, but their preparations for the wall assault were curtailed by the Parthians who menaced the lands to the south. Antilochus tried to prevent the molestation of the Dahi people, but the wrath of Euclid could not be placated after the loss of his cherished watch goose. Meanwhile, Seleukos II destroyed the Parthian presence in Scythia, and Euclid rapidly followed his victory at Cath with triumphs over the Parthians at Antioch and Margiana, and finally subjugated the disobedient satrapy at Nisa. Hierax was joined in his conquest in Magna Graecia by the surging strength of the Seleukid navy, and their combined might ensured Seleukid dominance over the central Mediterranean. With Hierax's triumph over Rome all but complete, and Seleukos II having completely restored the eastern satrapies to the empire, the dream of Alexandria is finally realized through the descendants of Seleukos Nicator, a synthesis of Greek and barbarian that now rules the greater part of the world through strength of arms. However, even as the realization of utter defeat is beginning to dawn on its enemies, the empire rests on shaky foundations and its rule is enforced by military garrisons. It will take a greater victory and a revolutionary overhaul of its subject states to provide the economic pillar that will buttress the kingdom for centuries to come.
Welcome back to the Hawk's Talon, stepfather. I see that you have grown quite comfortable wearing the purple cloak of royalty. Maybe you should spend more time ensuring the obedience of our Roman citizens.
On the contrary, Hierax, the Roman citizens are quite easily kept in check by the Macedonian garrisons, which I myself have trained in policing the city. While the garrisons, and for that matter the whole Seleukid military, are my primary concern. Without almost constant conquest and plunder, there is no way to sufficiently compensate them, and neither are they easily dispersed into the general population. What will you give them? Treasures from the royal cult? Land or political office?
That's why I've told you we must continue our military efforts. We must conclude the war on the Sardinian separatists and then go north into Gaul.
Pausanias came with orders directly from Antioch. No further military action without the explicit consent of Seleukos Kallinikos.
Kallinikos, beautiful victory for my brother. This was our victory. My mother's victory. He steals my valor and sabotages our half of the kingdom. Yes, we must wait. Even a volcano must wait. But when the time comes, I will cover the land with fire and ash.
I don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but I'm going to try to reach the absurdly high income of 90,000 talents per turn that earns us the economic victory conditions as a final step to this campaign. Looking at our trade and finance overview, we're already at a slightly elevated tax rate and we're getting about 22,000 from taxes, 10,000 from slaves, a staggering 18,600 from trade, and 5,900 from other sources including routine tribute paid by our client states. In total, this amounts to 57,000 in gross income, and all but 10,000 is currently devoted to our obscene military and naval upkeep. Of course, it won't hurt to have more trade partners, but we're required to have 15. Currently we have 14, while we're also missing one specific resource, leather. It's hard to believe we made it this far without a strip of leather in our kingdom, but at least we can quickly rectify both of these shortfalls with a single agreement. The Rieti north of the Alps are not particularly friendly but willing to trade with us, and so we get a little additional revenue and the missing resource all at once. That takes care of the trade aspects of the economic victory conditions, but there are also some missing provinces, including the remainder of Scythia, as well as Provincia. Scythia should be a simple enough conquest, the Roxolanians having left their large army conveniently in range of Seleukos adjacent to Daix. I don't relish the thought of fighting an entire army of horse archers, so I take the auto-resolve here, even though the casualties are a bit ugly. With Parthia vanquished, our southern and eastern border are now completely secure, but I'll leave Euclid behind to govern and manage any unforeseen problems that may arise, while Antiochus will begin a long trek north to take over the garrison of Scythia once Seleukos has gained victory. As to the seemingly insurmountable task of raising our income to the spectacular 90,000 talents per turn needed, I investigated a few possible options. Thracia, of all my regions, has for some reason a tremendous potential for wealth production, and it still has room for growth. Our best bets for income seem to come from slaves, commerce, and cultural sources. The wine trader in particular has been an underutilized building that produces a modest degree of wealth on its own, but provides substantial boosts to trade tariffs and cultural wealth. I don't want to lose the slave trader here, so I begin building another agora in the empty slot at Philippopolis, and upgrading the harbor at Anthea. It's also worth noting that the minor settlements have some striking bonuses, including the Tier 4 slave facility I already have at Edessos, but also the lead-producing town at Navisos. It not only produces over 260 wealth on its own, but generates a staggering 25% bonus to wealth from all sources. The downside, it turns out, is that it will take 14 turns over 3 years before it's ready. The Roxolanians, apparently sensing our intent, offer a very large sum for peace, and while I would permit them to live on as a satrapy, particularly convenient as they would form a northern buffer for our empire, the men of the steppe are too independent for such an arrangement, so it seems like the war will have to continue. Sadly, just as we hit the required 15 trading partners, one has already bitten the dust, as the Illyrian Confederation are no longer available to trade, by virtue of their having been annihilated. Having put some building plans in motion at Thracia, I'm now looking at one of my other lucrative provinces and contemplating the possible upgrades. Again, the Tier 4 resource town structures seem to have the biggest impact, and the dye-producing city of Tyros is even more impressive than the lead-producing Navisos. The Tier 4 upgrade promising 600 wealth from maritime commerce, and a 20% boost to commerce from all regions, presumably all regions in this province, but who knows. Likewise, the nearby glassware settlement at Palmyra adds a huge bonus to research rate, although we don't have the wealth for the upgrade this turn. Scylla's terror chased down Classis 3 off the coast of Genoa, although I lose more ships in the engagement than I'd planned. Not a big problem though, as we're going to be drawing down the navy in short order anyway. In my search to replace the Illyrian Confederation as the elusive 15th trade partner, I eventually come up with the Cessitani, who are keen to get some kind of arrangement going, and I agree to a nice one-time tariff of 4,000 for the privilege. The Carthaginians, now relentlessly hammering their Roman rivals, send a fleet off to Sardinia, defeating the Romans there but only sacking the city before returning to their own naval base at Corallus. Our income is starting to finally improve, but only slightly this turn. I've got a rebellion to deal with in between Seleukia and Carchedon and Apamea by the Salt Lake, and not wanting to risk these recently conquered lands, I decided to spend a bit of my wealth reinstating Sosikles, the former commander of the Medusa Head Wielders, who has returned from his injuries from the botched assassination attempt last episode to lead a new army, the Gigantes, against the Punic rebels. Although I've begun to stop pushing outward in our conquests, there are still some territories that I want, and in particular the formerly Greek colony of Kyrene cannot just be left to its Garamantian overlords. Brison ventures into the desert to inflict a decisive but costly defeat on the Garamantian army south of the city, while Pausanias and the Heralds of Triton make their way to blockade the port. Looking at the balance bar here, you'd think I have no hope of winning this battle, and perhaps that's correct. But I haven't had the opportunity to try the new siege ships in a city assault, and the navies are relatively expendable by this point anyway. It seems Poseidon is not with us today, as it's quite dark in the stormy weather that hampers our approach to the city. As we've seen before, Rome too suffers from the ships permanently occupying docking slots, so we can't just land our whole fleet at any one point, and I'm forced to spread our force out a bit, but still manage to concentrate to some degree on the northeastern corner of the city. We'll start by flinging our ballista stones at the wall for as long as it takes, and if we run out of ammunition without creating a substantial breach, we'll just retreat from the fight. To say the ballista ships are overpowered is putting it mildly. Though their shots aren't especially impactful, they seem to have an endless supply of them. Quite strange that it doesn't impact the buoyancy of their craft. With the defenders unable to respond, it seems what's required here is neither strength nor skill, just an extreme level of patience as the ships continually chip away at the walls. I put the battle on super fast forward and watch the timer count down, and a solid 7 minutes go by before the first segment of wall is toppled, although as you can see by that point the ship's stores of ammunition have barely been dented. I just keep knocking holes in the wall, really trying to balance the time left in the battle against the ability to keep pounding the settlement from afar. Now working on our third section of wall, already some of the garrison troops are wavering from this unrelenting barrage, and I decide I can start moving up a group of marine ships for a landing, preceded by our archer ships, who line up at the eastern wall to provide covering fire.
The Lithablos ships have plenty of ammunition, and if they run out, we just send more from the supply ships. The problem is that if we don't make our attack soon, the Garamantians will have organized their defenses inside the city, where the siege ships are of no value. The men of this fleet are outstanding sailors and excellent marines, but we're badly outnumbered. Our chances rest on quickly gaining control of the choke points inside the city and capturing their commander. And stop arguing with me. My uncle Cordylion would have your blood all over that beach by now. I've opened the path to glory for you, but you must go forth and seize it for yourselves.
The Marines, though few in number, are fierce combatants, and are led by Pausanias himself as they storm the beach and tear into the weak garrison troops. It takes my Marines about as long to chase off all of the defenders from the wall as it does for the pair of siege ships to topple the third section. So that task complete, and about 18 minutes into the fight, I start maneuvering my ranged ships and the ballista ships around toward the northern wall to try to create another breach. Inside the city, the Marines move deeper into the streets and beyond the walls. 3 regiments in pursuit of various African militia units on the northern side, as Pausanias and his retinue begin capturing the morale point that is situated to the east of the main victory objective, which in turn is defended by multiple garrison units including their commander. The rest of my Marines have unloaded at the northern wall and are just waiting for an entrance to be created. It's taking the ballista ships so long I decided to just move the additional Marines around to the eastern wall, where there's already a large breach, and as they continue pouring through, our force inside the city is rapidly swelling in size, even as the defenders are shrinking back from the walls. We have plenty of time and ammunition left, with still 37 minutes to go in the battle. But I just couldn't continue to sit and watch the siege ships slowly hammer the defenders into submission. So with his Marines gathered up, Pausanias mounts the bloody assault on the victory objective, the bulk of his force moving straight in to confront the garrison commander on the northeastern side of the objective, while another unit of Marines fights against some garrison spears to open the way to the western enemy flank, and 2 more Marine units skirt the western edge of town to approach the defenders' rear. Although we're taking some casualties, our original 4 units, now having dipped to half strength, we're still winning the battle by far, and one by one the defending units fall at the victory objective. As my 3 Marine units unite on the western flank to overwhelm the spearmen there, Pausanias and his men break the garrison commander, and the sum of these actions precipitates a chain rout and a victory without having to actually capture the objective. With about 10% losses, we earn a heroic victory for our patience. I have to say I was impressed with the Lithablos ships, although they seem a little bit silly, being at the same time completely supreme and totally boring. It's probably worth having seen this once, although it seems like a dull way to conduct a campaign, so I'm not too disappointed that I waited this long to get the military port to build them. We'll put most of our wealth toward the conversion in Libya this turn, and the Seleukiots continue making their way west to unite with the Heralds of Triton for the merging of the 2 fleets. Anastasia, scouting the Roxolanian city of Ra, finds it defended, albeit weakly, with a small army of horse archers looking out over the river, toward which Seleukos II and the dragons of Bel Marduk make their way. The Garamantians, ousted from their possession at Kyrene, ask for an unconditional peace, and as we've seen before, the refusal of such an offer is followed by a renewed attack. The Desert Winds, previously and apparently beaten to a pulp by Brison's Golden Fleece, attack with a huge number of fairly potent African mercenaries at their disposal. Fortunately, Brison has the movement to get out of the desert and back to the safety of the road before he's trapped by the horde. We've finally finished fore and aft rigging, the top-tier naval technology, and with it follows the completion of the management tree and its Tier 3 bonus that further reduces army upkeep. The political shenanigans also continue, neither Hierax nor Antigonus Dozan having the strength to produce an outright rebellion, but an attempt on Antilochus's life leaves him unable to command for now. In a way, Brison's enemies have done a favor in propelling his army back toward the road, as this places them out of the desert attrition zone and back into an area where we can rapidly replenish troops. Brison counterattacks with the fresh men at his disposal, and the tables having turned on the Garamantians, who are now themselves badly disadvantaged on the balance bar. We're able to defeat their army, and have the movement left over to run down the survivors, eliminating them entirely from the region. The other things to finish up in Libya are the building conversions left over from last turn, and the Seleukiots finally arrive to trade ships with the Heralds of Triton. I keep the ballista ships and the stronger marine crews, but dispense with the remainder, and afterward disband the Seleukiots entirely. Sosikles and his new army, the Gigantes, are small but potent, as the 4 crack legionary regiments and the Royal Guard are more than a match for the Punic rebels, who retreat before his initial attack, only to be chased down and eliminated in the follow-up. I move him back to Apamea, and start recruiting some pikemen as well to round out the infantry part of the army. Although this runs counter to our plan to ramp up the economy, Africa remains the most turbulent part of the empire, and we're undermanned in this area with only Brison and the Golden Fleece. I debated for a bit on which direction to take my research. I initially selected the Cult of Alexander, seeing this as the most lucrative choice, but eventually replaced it with public auctions, as this was the speedier choice and needed for building upgrades like the Tier 3 wine shop and slave market. Seleukos II and Bacchides, the new temporary commander of the Jaws of Tiamat, are now trudging through the snows of Scythia to reach their destinations. As they do so, we pass through a fairly uneventful in-turn sequence. Seleukos surrounds the Roxolanians at Dakes, although I decide there's no hurry to make the assault, and perhaps I can even wait until the Jaws of Tiamat are closer before commencing. Searching for more sources of revenue and trade, I find the nearby Mosisli in southeastern Mauritania are agreeable to trade negotiations, giving us a little bit of a buffer in case another of our trade partnerships goes belly up. The Carthaginians continue sacking the Roman city at Sardinia, but still refuse to capture it, so the painful Roman rump state limps on. The Heralds of Triton continue prosecuting our war against the Garamantians, who for whatever reason have left an entire fleet of transports at sea and within range of our extremely well-equipped navy. There's clearly no reason to fight this one, so we get a nice and easy heroic victory with the click of a button. Another trade agreement has broken down, and this time it's the Reate, our source of leather, so we'll definitely need to capture the Roxolanian city to procure the alternative source. Also, Antilochus has returned, or he would have, but suffers yet another of the assassination attempts which have grown all too common. Denia scouts into the edge of the Great Desert where the Garamantian home settlement of Tinamensi lies, and Sosikles moves behind her to the southern border of our own territory, where he rounds out his force with a large number of Greek toxitoi. After having spent my income in various other necessary ways for the past couple of turns, I'm back to my upgrades at Thracia, improving the trade port at Anthea, and both the agoras at Anthea and Navisos to land-based trading posts, and adding my planned wine trader at Philippopolis. By now we've finished the public auctions technology that will let us add some more of the income-boosting Tier 3 buildings to our cities. I decided labor organization was a good compromise this time, taking on 6 turns to complete, and granting a significant reduction in the Empire maintenance penalty, along with a bonus to tax rate. Another of my lucrative provinces in the recently acquired Magna Graecia also has significant room for improvement. This province also gets the wine trader and Tier 3 harbor at Brundisium, and the land-based minor settlement trading post at Lubeon. Sosikles and the Gigantes have reached Tidimensi, and his good quality troops make quick work of the garrison and the accompanying Garamantian army. I considered subjugating the Garamantians, but ultimately decided to take the settlement for myself, since we only need one more, the Roman-held city of Garama, to hold the entire province. Seleukos II continues to hold his encirclement of the city at Ra, in the Scythian wastes, but the odds just seem to be getting worse as we're suffering continual attrition. The Jaws of Tiamat are finally just a few seasons away, but the Roxolanians have decided to force the engagement as they sally out in defense of their settlement during the following turn. The horsemen are facing us on the landscape outside the city, which is a fairly reasonable choice on their part, granting them room for maneuvering. We'll have to hope that our numerous infantry archers, Lithobolos, and the heavily armored hoplite will be sufficient to overcome the opposing storm of arrows in what will almost certainly be a very bloody engagement. The scourge of the steppe emerged first, the cavalry-only army crunching across the snow-covered plain, coming straight in against our line of archers and spearmen. I start maneuvering my own limited mounted troops, the 3 units of citizen cavalry, out wide to the right, knowing I'll need to time their attack well to inflict maximum damage without getting the already weakened regiments of Greek horsemen wiped out. My Persian and Greek bowmen are in 2 heterogeneous groups of 3, each comprised of 2 Persian regiments and a unit of Greeks attached. Each group of 3 focuses its fire on 1 horse archer regiment at a time, trying to break individual units rather than whittle them down several regiments at a time. This seems to work, as I've already got 1 unit of Roxolanians wavering by the time I'm forced to pull the archers back behind the line to protect them from any enterprising melee cavalry. In the distance, the garrison army is marching onto the battlefield in a long column, but by this time the scourge of the steppe have formed a long line of horsemen in front of our own wall of hoplites, and the 2 sides are engaging in a ranged duel. This is working out to our advantage since they're firing at all of our units, not just the lightly armored ones, and the hoplites and white shields are soaking up a lot of the arrow fire. The citizen cavalry are making their way around the enemy flank and begin veering in toward the rear of the enemy line, as I know I'll have to commit them before the garrison shows up. As they near the enemy line, the general of the scourge of the steppe, Saulus, declines to engage with his lancers and instead heads straight for the edge of our infantry line, while the nearby archer cavalry skirmish away. Saulus and his horsemen are caught in the spear points of our hoplite at the right side of our line, a battle he's sure to lose, while the deformation of the enemy line, as the horses flow like water away from our own cavalry, is causing them to bunch up and take even more arrow fire from our Persian and Greek archers. As the citizen cavalry continues sweeping across the battlefield from right to left, eventually they encounter a unit of Scytho-Sarmatian lancers, who hold their ground but receive only a brutal charge and a quick death for their bravery, while the rest of the Roxolanian line continues crumpling up onto itself, the horsemen bunched into a tighter and tighter cluster, and still under fire. Finally, having apparently reached a critical mass, this densely bunched group of horsemen begins rolling further east and toward the left end of our line. And by now the garrison, including its own limited supply of horsemen, have arrived and are subjecting our cavalry to some arrow fire. My right-hand group of 3 archer infantry focus their fire on the oncoming solitary unit of steppe local horsemen who are harassing our cavalry, while the remainder of our missile infantry and the Lithombolos keep their fire trained on the dense cluster of the scourge of the steppe. 2 of my citizen cavalry regiments hang back slightly to finish off a unit of lancers, while the 3rd continues barreling toward the mass of retreating enemies, who finally, seeming to realize their far superior numbers, turn and descend on their pursuing Greek horsemen. Although we wiped out a couple of units in the center, this unfortunately spells an end for one of my already limited cavalry regiments. Weakened but not yet out of the fight, my remaining 2 cavalry press into the opponents, demolishing their comrades, and in the process take down another Roxolanian horse archer regiment. My archers on the right side have finished off the local archers, but now face a much more significant enemy, the enemy commander and his Sarmatian noble horse archers. Behind him, the large garrison army is nearing our line, and my archers again begin pulling back to the safety behind the hoplite shields. 1 more citizen cavalry regiment goes down, and I pull the last unit back to the safety of our line as they retain only about 20% of their original number. I also have a unit of my Chirophori and Greek archers in retreat, and there are still a horde of enemies to deal with. At this point, things are not looking good. But Seleukos fights on, and the rest of my archers keep returning fire, and finally a few of the horse archer regiments among the scourge of the steppe begin to intermittently waver. As the garrison infantry charge into our own line, we now have a chance to even the odds, as the Greek melee superiority should prevail. The hoplites lower their spears and countercharge, and they're aided in the center by Kallinikos himself and his royal swordsmen. As predicted, we're winning the melee engagement, in some cases driving off the enemy spearmen in a matter of seconds, but our archers continue to lose the ranged duel with the more numerous enemy, as the opposing fire becomes more and more lopsided in the Roxolanians' favor. The enemy line in the melee continues collapsing, and I'm able to move hoplite units around the edges, sending 1 to drive back the horse archers on the left, and 2 more begin moving around the eastern edge to approach the enemy ranged infantry corps, as well as the enemy general Raudameos, who is driven right into the waiting swords of Seleukos' royal bodyguard. Trapped but outnumbered, Raudameos and his Sarmatian bodyguard are shattered and driven from the battlefield. My hoplite are now in full pursuit of the enemy foot archers, who have no recourse other than to fall back at full speed, pausing every so often to fire a volley. We can't easily catch them, but the heavy armor of our hoplite prevents them from causing significant damage to us either. The remainder of the garrison army has been driven off, so the only real threat remaining is the 6 or so horse archer regiments of the Scourge of the Steppe. So we retained a pair of Persian archer regiments in our Lithobolus crew. None of these regiments have any ammunition, so all we can do is make a slow advance and try to drive the enemy into a corner while we weather their arrows. Fortunately, it seems that they too have mostly run out of arrows and begin committing their men to melee, at first mobbing my solitary regiment of Thuriaphore swordsmen who are caught out in front of our line, breaking that regiment. However, the horsemen don't fare nearly as well against the hoplite, and what promised to be a very painful chase around the map instead becomes a rapid destruction of the enemy in their suicidal charges onto our spears. All but one of the horse archer regiments have been driven off, that one apparently still having some arrows to shoot, but now we seem to have wrested control of the situation as most of the enemy are scattered and falling back. At this point, it's just a matter of waiting for them to exhaust their few remaining missiles until they're willing to commit to the melee. And although our own army is fairly decimated from the battle, I have plenty of my heavily armored regiments remaining to take the punishment. I do eventually lose the lone regiment of hoplite, who drove back the enemy infantry archers, but eventually things settle down as both they and our men reform opposing battle lines. But as the wings of our own formation spread out and threaten to envelop the Roxolanian archers, the men of the steppe see their hope fading and set down their bows in the snow in a gesture of surrender. Just as bloody as I'd feared, with about 1,500 dead on our side, but still I'm pleased to come away with a victory and our emperor alive. We actually lost several regiments as a whole, including 2 hoplite, 2 Persian archer units, and 1 of the Greek cavalry. This has left the city essentially undefended, and back in our own turn I'm able to easily capture the settlement without the loss of too many more men, thus ending the Roxolanian faction and capturing the whole of Scythia for ourselves. Sosikles and the Gigantes make their way from Tidimensi to Garama, but it seems we're in a race with the Carthaginians who also want to claim the Roman city. In addition to the repairs and conversions needed in Scythia, I used the rest of my wealth this turn to make improvements in Libya, upgrading the Ammonium settlement, the port at Paratinion, and the farms at Augila, and adding another agora at Kyrene. After all this work, our income has only budged by about 4,000, up to 60,000 gross on the long road to 90,000 talents. However, some of the big upgrades are still in development, so we'll see how far those get us before we throw in the towel on this effort. Next turn, most of the wealth, a cool 9,000, is spent upgrading the slave trader at Philippopolis to Tier 3, and as you can see, we still have 5 turns left on the original 14-turn expansion of the lead mines at Navisos. Some of these later upgrades are so lengthy I've almost forgotten I was working on them by the time they've completed. Unfortunately, the Carthaginians have reached Garama ahead of us and begun to besiege the city, thereby excluding us from capturing it until they've resolved their siege one way or another. Not surprisingly, they initiate their attack in the following in-turn phase, and I decline to be involved. Although we can't see the result, it turns out to be very strange. Next turn, you can see that the Carthaginians have been driven back from the city walls, but when I initiate our own attack, I'm not even required to fight for the city, it's just an automatic capture. I'm not sure I've ever seen this before. Interestingly, the option to subjugate Rome at Garama is present, so that means the Carthaginians also took Sardinia in the previous turn. I considered it as the thought of the once great Roman Empire, now exiled to the Sahara Desert under the heel of Seleukid dominion, was an interesting idea, but I decided ultimately that we need the unification of this small province. This doesn't completely destroy Rome, as they have one tiny legion, Legio II, consisting only of a single general's bodyguard unit remaining on Sardinia. And fittingly, although he's been dormant for most of this episode, Hierax is given the honor of dispatching the last of the Romans. I do have one more job for the Western Viceroy before he's let out to pasture. In our list of achievements needed for the economic victory, aside from the 90,000 talents we need, there's just one other. I need the settlements of Provincia along the southern coast of Gaul, including the obdurate little Greek colony known as Massalia, that happily continues to trade with our empire but refuses to acknowledge Seleukid sovereignty. I would like to get the emperor finally back from his long journey to the capital, but there are a group of Arsi hanging around Ra that are making me fairly nervous, and while the jaws of Tiamat are finally almost to the city, I can't safely move Seleukos out yet. They've set up a fortified outpost near the river just outside of Ra, but remain neutral for now. I move up Bacchides, and he trades units with Seleukos, taking on the extra Lithobolos, the White Shield Pikes, and Demetrius. while the rest gets disbanded and Seleukos goes back to the pool of nobles for now. The Golden Fleece tackle a few Garamantian rebels, as Sosikles and the Gigantes make their way back to secure Tidomensi. What I feared might happen has come to pass. The RC have forced us into taking a hostile stance, declaring war on our Parthian satrapy. I don't want to lose Parthia, so we'll just have to deal with the consequences of supporting our client state. Next turn, we've finished labor organization, and with it, and the disbanding of the Dragons of Bel Marduk, our income has risen steeply, the surplus up to 23,000 now. Bacchides is in an ideal position to deal with the RC, trapping them between his army and the city garrison, and the steppe army is quickly eliminated at Ra. We do have a problem with the local supply in Scythia, but a supply depot is already underway at Dakes, and I'm hoping that will solve the problem. It's also high time that poor Antilochus regained command of his army, and so I swap Bacchides out for the original commander of the Jaws of Tiamat. Having been beaten into submission, the RC are willing to go back to a peaceful trading arrangement. While I would prefer to make them the satrapy, this is the more expedient solution, so I allow them to maintain their sovereignty, if they agree to trade, and a moderate payment. This extra wealth helps with the building conversions this turn, which are focused at Caucasia. Fairly impressed with the results of labor organization, I decide for my next research to target the ultimate technology on the philosophy tree, consensual contracts. That adds an even bigger reduction to empire maintenance and a bonus to tax rate, although it will take 14 turns even with our research rate at 380%. You can see we've grown our total income to 67,000. And this will probably rise significantly next turn with the completion of the projects we started at the outset of this episode. We'll try next time to push the envelope even further, seeking more trade agreements, ultimate technologies, and top-tier construction achievements in pursuit of the elusive 90,000 talent goal. With Seleukos' triumphant return to Antioch, the Empire has entered a golden age of peace and prosperity, although the competitive Hierax has his eye on a lucrative region along the southern coast of Gaul to make the western half of the Empire every bit as competitive as the east.